Haley. Good to meet you. I'm Sherry, Tim's wife. Good to meet you. Are you a student?
Yeah, I'm in one of his seniors.
Oh, wonderful.
His last year.
Getting ready for the show. Yes. Oh, okay. Good. Do it tomorrow. It's getting quiet.
I am.
Introduce the show.
So, so this is the faculty exhibition, and let's see, who else here? Why don't you say your names, those of you who are participating in the show?
I'm Professor Maya Durham-Rayner. Professor Janae Kotak.
Professor Kelly Vanderbrug.
Vivian Zapata.
Emily Linskog.
Is that everybody who's
That's everybody. Yeah, we're missing two.
So we do these.
Who are you?
Oh, my name is Bob Hendricks. They didn't put me in the show. I'm Tim Lowey. So we've been doing these faculty shows. We do them most every year, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's a chance for our faculty to present their work, and I think hopefully it's helpful for the students to understand who their faculty are a little better by seeing their work. So the title naturally sort of came out of thinking about particularly Kelly's work, but there's sort of evidence of nature in work. It's not a very important title, it's just naturally. What else? What can we say? Do you have questions?
What? Talk about your piece.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. So I have two pieces here.
Yeah.
They're from two very different series. I have a daughter, my wife Sherry, and I have a daughter who is now 36. She is profoundly disabled and is like a newborn perpetually. So I have, over the years, made a lot of work related to Tema. This piece is part of a series of paintings. It's a Rainbow Girls series is what I'm calling it. And each of those paintings in that series is in conversation with painting, probably Baroque or Renaissance painting. This one is a little unusual in that I was hoping to show this in a show in Spain that fell through. But I was thinking about Spain, and there's a painter named Giuseppe de Ribera, am I pronouncing that correctly? Ribera had made a series of paintings related to the senses. One of those paintings is lost, and the one that's lost is related to the sense of hearing. So I titled this painting, The Sense of Sound, which is kind of confusing because sound is not a sense. So the word sense in that sense means making sense, the sense, this makes sense. And for Tema, it's really hard to tell what sound means to her, but anyway, that's something we think about, because she obviously hears, but not hears in the sense of understanding what she hears. So I was diligently painting this, started mid-October and worked very hard over the winter towards the show. While I'm working, this pillowcase is in my lap, and I'm wiping the brush on the pillowcase as I'm painting. And shortly before getting ready to bring it here, I was going to put the painting in the pillowcase. I laid it on the floor. I was like, I love that juxtaposition between mark making that has this obvious intentionality with mark making that is completely non-intentional in terms of I'm just cleaning my brush. So I like that juxtaposition, and hopefully it's not too distracting. This piece is part of a series of drawings of a person in a place, thinking about vocation, thinking about ministry. In this case, the drawing is of a photographer, a very good photographer who's standing right over there, Greg Metzler. Greg and I went out into a park near us, and I took a ton of photographs of him, and he took some of me. But this particular one, I really liked the way in which Greg sort of looks lost in this photograph. He's looking at his camera, but there's a sense of, it's not like he's presenting himself to the audience. And I really like the way in which he's in nature, but clearly not part of nature. The title references the painter Watteau, who paints all these bourgeois party paintings, but they take place in sort of a park or a forest. And there's a painting by Bush called The Perspective, so that's where the title of this comes from. So that's my work. I'd like to go next. Emily.
Okay. This is my piece here. I can't remember what I called it. What's written down? It's brand new.
Waves of question and response.
There you go. Waves of question and response. So this photograph was taken last summer. It was the last car trip I took with my dad. He died a month later. And I had this sort of panorama. We were driving between Las Vegas and Phoenix, and it's just open desert. So you sort of become very occupied with the things that are just in your immediate vicinity. And so I started to take lots of pictures out the window, lots of pictures in the car, and took this panorama of my own head, trying to get the full thing. My whole face in one image, and I got this is the most successful version. And I noticed just how the moles on my neck repeated by chance. And when I saw it, I thought, oh, that's so funny. And it looks like music. And it looks like there should be some musical notation, or it looks like musical notation or some sort of readable thing. It looked like a readable thing. And based on what happened the month after that, of losing my dad, I became really much more aware of just sort of like the mystical qualities of everything. And so I returned to this image like I returned to every image that involved my dad, with a lot more like sensitivity to these possibilities. And so I reached out when I had COVID, actually, in a very high fever. I emailed Tom Zell, just because I thought, well, I had brief conversations with him in the copy room, and he seems like a funny guy. He might think that this is funny too.
Who is
Tom Zell is the orchestra director. And so I sort of said, you know, I'm working on this body of work that's related to my dad and how he photographed his chemotherapy pills in these arrangements, and everything I'm doing is about arrangement. My dad's pills, my own collage, and now I'm thinking about musical arrangement. Is there any chance that you find this interesting? And if you never want to talk about it again, that's fine too. And instead he emailed me back and was like, I'm so interested, this is great. And so we had several email exchanges and conversations over coffee, and so just exactly what I wanted to happen happened, which was like you take a thing and it sort of expands infinitely outward. So the conversations with Tom Zell, like the stream of consciousness interpretation of those marks, which I turned into sort of notation and emailed to him. And so he's basically doing this notation where the low notes are one kind of sound, and then the high notes are another kind of sound. So he made 7 videos, so I made this sort of score where he's interpreting this 7 separate times with different things. And he said, I was thinking of the Glockenspiel. I said, great. And then he said, but every time I think about your dad, I return to the kitchen, which is perfect. And so so he just made this in his own kitchen. And so, like I said, everything just, I feel like just knowing what I know, I feel like in 10 years, this is gonna turn into something else entirely. And yeah, there you go. So, thank you. Okay.
Did Tom know you yet?
Tom did not know my dad.
Oh,
No,
okay.
no, but they could, I feel like if Tom was here, he would say, my consciousness knows Emily's dad's consciousness.
Okay.
So, and he wouldn't be wrong. So I feel like they know each other somehow. I
Yeah.
can't explain how, but anyway, so, yeah.
Any other questions?
Yeah. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks.
Kelly?
Okay, so these two paintings here are mine, and I made them both last summer, and they come out of a trip that my family took to Alaska, and our interaction with and my kind of weird surprise at the landscape there. And so this one I see as more a kind of like how in my imagination the landscape that we encountered exists there. And there are some things that are specific, but a lot of it is more trying to create a particular mood or feeling from the way the landscape functions, but almost more illustrative, right? And then like an illustration to a way of thinking about a landscape. And then this one is more about the sort of sensory experience of the landscape itself, of the land. The ground there in a lot of the places in Alaska are spongy because it's an Arctic ecosystem, and like there are some sort of like sedgy grasses, but most of it's like moss and little plants and flowers, and so when you walk on it, it's like this, it's different than walking through a park here or something. And I wanted to capture some of that like layered quality and texture and the way that it sort of felt a lot like just alive in a different kind of way than like walking across my lawn feels. And so, yeah, so I guess that's it. That's all I have to say about that. So.
I have a question. I'm curious about your process. These beautiful paintings, I love them. I'm wondering if you're working from memory of the trip, or do you have source material in your studio? Do you look at field guides? Do you look at photographs from your trip? I'm just curious about that. And my second part to the question, are you, when you're building the paintings, are you starting like with a sketch, or are you composing the paintings more like jazz, like when you're laying them out?
This one is much more from memory, but I spent a lot of time looking really closely at a lot of the trees, and especially, they have like 3 kinds of trees in Alaska, and that's it, except for down in some of the places that get just like a little more, like a little warmer, but most of it, there are just 3 different types of trees, and a lot of the pine trees have this witch's hair moss that hangs from the ends of the branches, and then it also has some kind of blight right now, so a lot of them are dying. A lot of the pine trees are dying from the bottom up, and so they're like toward the bottom they get like a lot more brown and brittle. So that was something that I wanted to somehow like get across, that texture. But when you said like, how do I work? In both of these, there were other paintings underneath that were unfinished that I didn't really, like I had sort of started them as classroom demonstration paintings. And I left the, some of the arrangement of forms the same, of like these different still lifes in this one. This one was like a little more just blocks of shape, but this one had arrangement of forms that I maintained and kept the same, and some of those things became objects. So like this sort of dead branch looking thing was like a, I don't know, and some of this blue here is part of what was there in the original, and there were these like swoopy marks that I kept. So some of it was a little bit more like, I want to keep these things and change these other things. Yeah. This one is from a photograph originally, like I started it from a photograph, but then I wanted there to be like a void that went down into something that felt mysterious, and I noticed that that started to look like an eye, so I wanted to kind of like emphasize it a little bit but not make it too corny, so though I mean, why not? But I don't know, so a lot of it is like once there was stuff there, I just kind of like followed the trail.
That's fun, super fun. Thank you.
Right. Vivian, do you want to go next?
Sure.
Okay.
Okay. Can I start with a big one, maybe?
Yeah?
Can I start? I would say starting in graduate school, I made an accidental observation, and that observation was that the way we think about nature through our representations, I noticed a lot of these objects were like highly idealized, very beautiful. So for example, if you were to go to an antique store, you would see that these objects are very beautiful, or even kitschy items that they sell in stores. And I noticed that these kind of idealized representations are almost in direct opposition to what is happening in the real world, and specifically carrying an awareness of the destruction of forests and how other species, their populations are dwindling. And so for me, and also maybe the treatment of animals within animal agriculture as well. And so for me, carrying an awareness of all of this inevitably creates a sense of sadness, and I think this expresses that. But I should say that it's not like a hopeless sadness. I think it's hopeful. The canary, yellow of course, is a cautionary color if you think of traffic lights. But yellow is also a warm color, so yellow is a hopeful color, and there's always hope for change too. And that's it. Oh, there's one more thing. There's this quote that I really love, and I want to share it with you. It's just right here. This is a passage in the book The Spell of the Sensuous, by ecologist David Abram. Okay. Caught up in a mass of abstractions, our attention hypnotized by a host of human-made technologies that only reflect us back to ourselves, it is all too easy for us to forget our carnal inherence in a more than human matrix of sensations and sensibilities. Our bodies have formed themselves in delicate reciprocity with manifold textures, sounds, and shapes of inanimate earth. Our eyes have evolved in subtle interaction with other eyes, as our ears are attuned by their very structure to the howling of wolves and the honking of geese. To shut ourselves off from these other voices, to continue by our lifestyles to condemn the other sensibilities to the oblivion of extinction, is to rob our own senses of their integrity and to rob our minds of their coherence. We are only human, only in contact and conviviality with what is not human.
That's beautiful.
Any questions? I'll take questions if we have any.
Did you want to say anything about your drawing?
Oh, this guy? Sure. Yeah, this is an observational drawing of a sparrow fledgling that I found. And I actually didn't know what kind of bird it was when I first saw it. I had to do a quick research, but based on the coloration and the pattern, I knew it was a sparrow. And I think I've seen I like to go on long walks, and I've seen a lot of strange things, but it was the first time seeing a bird like this, and I was just really drawn to its perfection and its design, I guess. And so that was what inspired that. So yeah, it's just a drawing from observation.
One thing, like, I'm sorry, that I've been thinking about as I look at this drawing, and the thing that strikes me so much about it, that feels related to what you read, is the kind of sensuous surface of the drawing, and like the velvety kind of application of the graphite is so compelling. I feel like it creates, like, we touch it with our eyes, right? Like, we sort of like reach out and like rub our hand or our face against it, and our mind. So that's right. But I think like that, both the other, but also the call to the awareness of the senses, I think it comes alive, which I don't think always happens with work that's so observationally, concise. But I think with this, it feels like that's a real conscious decision and something that's compelling to you. I don't know if you have. I just wanted to say that, but I also is that something you're thinking about as you're building up a drawing?
No, that's interesting. I don't think, of course I'm very careful about composition, and I choose objects. Yeah, I think the ornament here I chose for its texture. I like the fact that, I'm looking at the scene, but at the same time it's reflecting everything in my space. But that's an interesting comment, because I am drawn to work that is on the exterior very beautiful, but all of that is superficial because the content is a little deeper than that. And so.
Yeah, and I find the most sort of what's the word? Not menacing, but disquieting thing about the drawing is the shadow, even more so than the bird. It's really interesting to me the way that the shadows scale becomes ambiguous all of a sudden, where it feels like you're looking at a farmhouse in the distance in silhouette, but you're looking at an ornamental birdhouse. And it's really interesting. I feel like all of a sudden it sort of pushes the viewer out into a bigger world and thinking about other kinds of things just by that weird scale thing that happens with them. And when I was talking about the sensuous surface, I don't even mean so much of the objects, but of the graphite itself. Like the way we look at the graphite itself just is so velvety and gorgeous. So.
Oh, thank you. It might be the paper too. It was like my first time using Stonehenge printmaking, so I think choosing different mediums can affect how the graphite looks and all that.
Yeah.
I find myself.
That's a really good thing for students to hear and remember, right? It's just the way the paper you choose changes the effect of the work itself and what's actually happening. I think that's, sorry.
When I'm looking at it, I find myself thinking about labor, thinking about the making of it, and the obvious labor in it. I'm not sure if it's unique to other realist work, but part of it feels somewhat absurd in terms of the combination of elements. And so the labor going into it feels like it's a little bit more like the subject more than it might be if you were, say, just doing a drawing of the birdhouse. And these other elements, it's like, what is this stuff doing together? Again, the labor says something about, I mean this. Well, what exactly do you mean? So it's interesting the way that the process actually is part of the setup in terms of how the piece is functioning. These are different birds, right? This bird from the bird that's named, the one, what is this, a canary?
A canary.
Another one's a sparrow? Interesting. Thanks, Mom. Who's following you?
Oh, okay.
Okay, so I'm gonna start talking about my earlier work a little bit first and then get into this. So I think the last work that I showed here actually was an exhibition called Plastic Longing, where I was kind of investigating objects from my grandmother's house, because I moved into my grandmother's house, like all these like precious objects that we had kind of like never seen, that you start unearthing like as you start going through someone's home. And then also thinking about the things that we do put out all the time that are like replicas of those things, like plastic tablecloths or other, but they're beautiful and there's something really interesting in that texture and just the object itself, even though it's a really wasteful throwaway kind of thing. So that got me starting to think about just like my interaction in relationship with sort of objects and the things that I was longing for, and even thinking about like status and like how those things might come together. So then jump forward, like moving through the pandemic and the fog of all of that. I had a son at the beginning of the pandemic, and for some strange reason, like maybe 6 months ago, like he got a hold of my phone and made this really weird, like 20-minute slow motion video of me walking my room. And as I was looking at the images, like some of them, there's like little pieces of me sort of in it, and it was just strange because I'm not used to sort of seeing myself from someone else's eyes, especially like thinking about like a 2-year-old taking these pictures and what are the things and the angles and stuff that he was focusing on. So at some point I was like, I'm going to do something with this. I don't know when. I'm going to do something with this image. And it's like, faculty show, good idea. So I went through and found a frame that had been kind of repeating in my head, like cropped it a little bit, but not much. It pretty much was that frame. And then started like playing with it in the computer a little bit. And as I spent more time looking at it, it felt like, it's weird because it felt kind of like sad in some ways, because it felt like this fog of the last couple of years sort of all coming together, like sort of making me into who I am, but being reflected in a weird way, like from the image itself. So I started playing with that and then printing it. The process that I'm using are polymer plate lithography, so digitally manipulating the image, making it into some bitmaps, and then printing over it. So it does like manipulate it and make it a bit more kind of hazy and foggy than it would be if it was just like a printed out solid piece. So I'm starting to work with some images now, thinking more about that idea of just like longing and also just like physical body and presence. I never do work with myself, like ever. Not as an actual physical person. Like I think I do a lot of things that are stand-ins for me, so this is definitely a new direction. But kind of excited to play with that and some more images. So yeah.
So is this you in the photo?
That is me in the photo.
What is this, this line that's continuing? What, I read it as a baseboard, but why does it continue behind the word?
So the way that the polymer plates work is that you're printing it from like a laser printer, and sometimes the way the toners like go, you know, like I don't always have the best print. So sometimes it's like a little uneven in the way that it just printed. But I kind of like that in the process, like that it makes it feel sort of strange and a little distant, like it doesn't feel solid to me. It feels like something. So I mean, I named the piece Tethered because I was just thinking about this idea of being connected like to my son and like being connected to my body and connected to that time. like, but in a way that feels a little tenuous, so.
There's something really tender about this image that I really love, like that focus just on the hand. I don't know, in the way that other parts of the body kind of fall away weirdly. I don't know, and the hand, this portrait, it like makes me think of Rembrandt a little bit too, in all of his like evocative hands. I don't know, it's really beautiful.
I have to thank Elon, because I'm serious, like I don't, like that's part of what's been strange, like as I look, because he does like to take pictures if I like fall asleep when I'm supposed to be watching. So it's been interesting seeing like what are the things that he focuses on, like a picture that's like of a really interesting part on my nose that I don't like, but like it looks really beautiful in the photograph, the way that it's sort of framed. And then there's a picture of a boat, but you know, like, so I don't know, it's just interesting because it's not any way that I would ever really think of sort of looking at myself or thinking about myself. So I want to use some of that imagery and manipulate it a little bit in some newer work, just, you know, kind of thinking through that some and what does that mean, yeah.
To me, the image is, it feels so real. There's like something about the way it's framed, to me that just, you know, in a different way than an artist or a photographer would frame something. Something about it just feels like a really genuine, true moment, and then having both of them next to each other, like the slight variation between them just makes me think about like memory and like this ephemeral moment that was captured, and it just, it feels so like genuine and true.
So he took the photograph.
He took a video, yes.
Is he gonna get credited?
I mean, he goes into the piece as well.
Okay.
He did not manipulate the photo or edited or printed their items, but definitely, like, if I talk about the piece, I don't think it would be right for me not to mention, like, where the imagery came from or how it came to be. I mean, I thought about that a little bit, like, oh, should I put that in? But I'm like, well, you know, but I'm thinking through what does that mean and like how does that fit into a larger body of work. I'm not planning on having like, oh, my pieces are Elon pieces, but this feels like a really interesting starting place to make some pieces in response to and to pull some of the other found images that, you know, I randomly find on my phone. So.
So am I correct that he's like holding the camera like this, right?
I don't know what he was doing. I'm serious, like.
But he's pretty this tall, right?
Or I think he was sitting on the bed. He was doing a bunch of things. On the
Okay.
bed, off the
Well,
bed, like
I'm just
rolling
thinking
around, like,
the eye level.
the eye level is lower. Yes,
Yeah.
the eye level would be lower. But honestly, like I could not, like rolling on the floor. I don't know. Which is strange when it's stretched out into a 20-minute slow motion video. So I mean, something that seemed a little like you know, turns into something a little bit different. So yeah. Okay, thank you.
So for a little bit of context about kind of where all this is coming from, I do have a short concept statement available along with the work because both because of the presentation method as well as kind of some insight into what you're looking at. A lot of my work and recent work involves the Ney persona, which is a character I perform both on stage in concert venues as well as in thinking and talking about various aspects of pop culture. And so I'm really interested in my work in general in exploring the effects of aspirational lifestyle culture, the ways and the reasons and the motivations behind why people consume and why people are compelled to consume. And then a lot of the Ney work in the past has dealt with the problems of consuming from a place of privilege. So that that can create issues like boredom, overconsumption, and addiction, even if it's just as simple as sugar or caffeine. And so during the pandemic, I spoke about this in our previous North Park faculty show, so this is kind of an interesting evolution. Myself and my partner and my core collaborator, Ryan, we both became very sick with COVID for 3 weeks, and there was a lot of anxiety involved with that experience, and I'm someone who definitely deals with a sort of high-functioning anxiety in my day-to-day life. And as a way to sort of calm me and to calm ourselves, Ryan suggested that we just make a bunch of music and just make it on analog synthesizers and record it and make it into something. And so out of that, 2 years later, I finally revisited those initial songs and those initial ambient tracks, which really I couldn't figure out what that connection was between this work that's just all in on pop culture and unicorn parties and like too many Starbucks drinks, and this idea of this new sense of self-awareness or agency out of a moment of personal anxiety, the sort of wild imagination of the hypochondriac, and this sort of situation. And I kind of came to the understanding or the idea that it's this very self-awareness, this idea that you're sort of straddling both needing to find refuge as well as make yourself free at the same time from your current situation, when your brain finally gets out of all of the distractions that our pop culture and image-saturated landscape just pummels at us on a day-to-day basis. And so we started talking about, now that these songs were songs, and they weren't just these kind of sonic landscapes, now that they were actually songs with lyrics, a lot of times going around in circles, and certainly not as satirical as lyrics in past performances and past songs have been. What are the visuals that go along with that? And these visuals that you're looking at are stills from a music video that is its like third iteration of being a rough cut. So it's an unfinished project right now, but it should be done by the end of February is my my editing goal. But you're looking at a sort of presentation of the lyrics and stills from this video that was filmed last April, in part through funding through the part-time faculty grant with North Park, which is super cool. And we filmed this in collaboration with a contact of ours who is a lighting designer, and then a contact of mine who works in a lot of like stadium level production environments in St. Louis, but at heart is an incredible artist and wants to do cool stuff. So it makes for an interesting collaboration. And my thought was to use, to create these sort of artificial spaces by using stadium grade lasers. And he was like, yeah, cool, let's do it. Let's set it up. We've got some space. Let's go. What I did not realize, and kind of another kind of psychological layer to this project, is that real live lasers are really scary. And so in filming this music video, we did an all-day safety demo on Friday.
Wow.
Like, I was getting actually like the high-functioning anxiety and like, am I gonna get cancer from this experience? Like, all of these feelings actually started rushing back to me. And so it made for a really interesting day of filming, because I knew I wanted to touch the lasers and perform the lasers as a part of the soundscape and do it in time. But I was just, like freaked out of my mind. I don't know if anyone's walked under a laser before, but as you do that, on your skin, you can literally hear the tiny particles of skin cells like get fried as you're walking through. It's totally safe. You don't want to like stay under there if you're just like, you know, I'm walking under the you want to keep your eyes closed, like, it's fine. But I, you know, as someone who gets really nervous about just, you know, getting on the road to like drive somewhere, it's like, it was a really interesting experience, but we created these spaces, this sort of these kind of futuristic leaning biomes, and the song references kind of constantly staring at the 7-segment display, the alarm clock that's on the desk, and kind of wondering how time's going to pass, and like the weird feelings of how time passes when you're sick or when you're anxious. And so we included a huge scale LED 7-segment display, and then these interesting kind of cages and spaces that either I'm performing within or trapped inside of as a part of this piece called Walk Between. So yeah, I think, yeah. It's very much a collaboration as well, and I included my partner Ryan. He's on his way to see the show. He's down teaching audio production at Columbia College, and then Chris and Aaron, who did incredible work working with us and teaching us how to navigate this really fascinating technology from the 80s that I learned a lot about. Yeah.
Is the music video available to see online?
It is not yet available, so I'm still working on the edit, getting things together and kind of how that moves and layers, but it's just like with everything with this project, it's been a little slow going, but hopefully by the end of February, early March.
So, how are you, in what format do you imagine the video being shown? Like, will it be like on Vimeo, like as a full, like how is it going to go out into the world once it's done?
Yeah, so because Nay, as the character, is so kind of like, you know, entrenched in this pop reality, or reality, false reality, the sort of, you know, are you authentic on social media or not? What is, what isn't? I think it's going to be released and promoted and marketed as a music video. So in the past, I've put music videos out through Vivo. Usually there's a copy on Vimeo and YouTube. And then probably put it out to some press outlets and see what happens.
Cool.
Yeah. Good question. Thank you.
So Dennis,
Dennis, nice.